The last thing Evan Rourke expected was to owe his life to the woman he'd written off before she ever fired a shot. Sarin Ridge was a dead place, cold rock, hollow wind, and 3 layers of enemy fire closing in from every angle. Arrow 7 was pinned, 1 man down, radio breaking apart, and 10 armed fighters were tightening the circle with the patience of people who already knew how this ended. Evan had 80 seconds before the last exit sealed shut. He didn't know that Marin Cole was already on the rocks above him. He didn't know she had been ready for this since the moment he told her she wasn't. If you're new here, this channel tells stories about real courage, real decisions, and the people history almost forgot. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Fort Ellery sat at the edge of nowhere useful. A forward operating base carved into the base of the Sarin Ridge mountain range, where the wind came down hard off the peaks every morning and the cold never fully left the bones, even in summer. It was the kind of place that filtered people quickly. You either learned to read the terrain, or the terrain read you first. Marin Cole had been reading terrain since she was 9 years old. She grew up in the northern Wyoming highlands, in a house with no neighbors visible from the porch, and a father who believed that silence was a language worth learning. Her father, Dale Cole, had spent 12 years as a Border Patrol rescue operator, the kind of man who got called in when everyone else had already given up. He didn't teach Marin how to shoot first. He taught her how to watch, how to read a hillside by the way the grass bent, how to tell the difference between wind-disturbed brush and something moving through it deliberately, how to hold her breath until the moment was exactly right, and not 1 second before. The shooting came later. It came naturally, the way most things do when the foundation is already solid. By the time Marin was assigned to Fort Ellery's long-range reconnaissance unit at 26, she had logged more confirmed observation hours than operators twice her age. She didn't talk about it. She didn't need to. Her file said everything for anyone willing to read past the first line. Most people stopped at the first line. Evan Rourke was one of them. Rourke commanded Arrow 7 with the authority of a man who had earned every scar on his record, and knew it. 2 combat deployments in difficult terrain, commendations for 3 separate extractions under fire. His team trusted him completely, and he had never once given them a reason not to. He ran a tight unit, experienced, coordinated, and built around a specific kind of trust that took years to develop. When word came down that his assigned sniper, a veteran named Garrett Walsh, had taken shrapnel to the knee during a training exercise and would be off rotation for 6 weeks, Rourke accepted the news without complaint. What he didn't accept, not internally, was the replacement. Marin Cole arrived at Fort Ellery on a Tuesday morning with a standard-issue kit, a duffel bag, and the kind of composure that some people read as confidence, and others read as inexperience pretending to be calm. Rourke watched her cross the yard from the operations window and said nothing, but the soldier standing next to him, a veteran on the team named Harris, caught the look on his face. "She's got good numbers," Harris said. "Walsh had better ones," Rourke answered and walked away from the window. That was the beginning of it. Not a confrontation, not a direct challenge, just a door that closed before Marin ever had a chance to knock on it. She noticed. She always noticed things like that. She didn't say anything about it either. Soldiers around a folding table, a projected satellite image on the far wall, and Rourke standing at the front with a laser pointer and the practiced calm of a man who had given 100 briefings just like this one. The objective was straightforward, at least on paper. A militant group operating under the designation Falcon Cell had reportedly seized a package of stolen military communications hardware, encryption-capable relay units, worth more to the wrong hands of the briefing. Then she asked if she could pull up the satellite imagery herself. Rourke handed her the laptop without comment. She enlarged the image of Marrowgate, rotated it, and spent 90 seconds studying it in silence before she spoke. "The entry corridor is too open," she said. "There's no reason for it to be that clear unless someone made it that way." She pointed to the rooftops along the main street. "These 3 structures have fresh disturbance on the surface. Could be weather, but the pattern is too even. Looks more like weight distribution. Someone spent time up there recently. She moved the cursor to the eastern edge of the settlement. These trucks are positioned in an arc. That's not how you park vehicles when you're using a site for storage. That's how you position them when you want to funnel movement in one direction. She paused, then pointed to the old water tower at the northern end of the settlement.
And this structure has a sight line to every major approach. If I were setting up an observation post for an ambush, that's exactly where I'd put it.
The room was quiet for a moment. Rourke looked at the image, then at Marin. "You're reading an ambush setup into a standard forward operating position," he said. "Falcon Cell doesn't have the coordination for something like that. The intelligence assessment puts them at basic defensive posture." "Intelligence assessments have been wrong before," Marin said. "Not aggressively, just as a statement of fact. So has pattern recognition from satellite imagery when you don't have ground-level context," Rourke replied. Walsh had 4 operations in this corridor. He would have recognized the difference between a staged position and a storage site. He closed the laptop. "Your concerns are noted, Cole. But we're not restructuring the approach based on a read that doesn't match the field intelligence." Marin didn't push back. She recognized the wall when she hit it. What she did instead, quietly and without announcement, was stay in the briefing room after everyone else had left. She pulled the satellite images back up on her own tablet and spent another 40 minutes studying them, not looking for new information, but mapping what she already knew against the terrain. She identified the western rock face that overlooked the entire settlement from above. She calculated the climb. She measured the sightlines. Then she went back to her quarters, packed her standard kit, and added 3 things that weren't on the mission loadout. A secondary topographic map printed at higher resolution, 2 backup battery packs for her radio, and a folded piece of paper on which she had already sketched the route up the western face. She didn't tell anyone. She just made sure she was ready, because in her experience, the difference between a warning and a coincidence was almost always decided after the fact, by whoever was still alive to call it. The night before deployment, Marin made one more attempt. She found Rourke in the operations room at 2100, reviewing final equipment checks with Harris. She waited until Harris stepped out, then crossed the room and set her topographic map on the table in front of him, without preamble. "I want to request a position change," she said. "The western rock face. There's a natural shelf at 40 meters elevation that gives full coverage of the entire settlement, every rooftop, both entry corridors and the water tower. From my assigned position on the southern ridge, I can cover maybe 40% of the operational area. From the western face, I can cover all of it." Rourke looked at the map. He looked at it for long enough that Marin thought for one brief moment that he was actually considering it. Then he straightened up and crossed his arms. "Your assigned position covers the extraction route," he said. "That's the priority. If we need to pull out fast, I need eyes on the southern pass, not on rooftops. If the settlement is a staged ambush, the extraction route is already compromised," Marin said. "Covering it from the south doesn't help if the threat is coming from inside the perimeter." "That's a significant if," Rourke said. "And right now, it's still just your read on a satellite image." He picked up the map and handed it back to her. "I need people who execute the plan, Cole, not people who rewrite it 12 hours before we move. You're on the southern ridge. That's final." Marin took the map. She kept her expression neutral, the same way she kept it neutral when she was behind the scope, when everything inside her was moving fast and everything outside her needed to stay completely still. "Understood," she said. She turned and walked out. In the hallway, she stopped for a moment and looked down at the map in her hands. She thought about Walsh, about the fact that Rourke had mentioned him twice now, held him up like a measuring stick she was always going to come up short against. She thought about the arc of those trucks in the satellite image, the even pattern of disturbance on those rooftops, the water tower with its perfect sightlines. She thought about what it meant to be right about something that no one believed, until it was too late to matter. Then she folded the map, put it in her jacket pocket, and walked back to her quarters. She laid out her kit on the bed and checked it piece by piece. Rifle, scope, ammunition, radio, the backup batteries, the secondary map. She picked up the folded sketch of the western face route and looked at it one more time, tracing the climb with her finger, the approach angle, the loose section of rock 2/3 of the way up that would need to be crossed carefully. The final shelf where she would have the sight line she needed. She didn't make a decision that night, not consciously. What she did was make sure that if the decision became necessary, she would be ready to act on it in under 4 minutes. She set her alarm for 04:30, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, listening to the wind come down off the ridge. It sounded, she thought, exactly like it had the morning her father first took her up into the Wyoming highlands and told her that the mountain didn't care how confident you were, it only cared whether you had paid attention. She had paid attention. She was still paying attention now. Morrow Gate looked exactly like the satellite images, which meant it looked exactly wrong. Arrow 7 entered from the southern corridor at 0712, moving in tight formation through the narrow approach road that cut between 2 rows of abandoned structures. The buildings on either side were the kind that mining settlements always left behind, low, functional, built to last a decade and somehow still standing after 30 years. Broken windows, rusted signage, walls stained by weather and neglect. Everything was still. Not the natural stillness of an empty place where the silence had a settled quality to it, like dust that had been undisturbed for years. This was a different kind of still, the kind that had edges to it, a slight tension underneath, like a room where someone had just stopped talking. Marin felt it from her position on the southern ridge the moment the team crossed the threshold. She pressed her eye to the scope and began moving it methodically across the settlement, left to right, near to far, the way her father had taught her to read a hillside. Not looking for anything specific, just looking. She found the first detail within 40 seconds. A curtain in the second window of the building on the left side of the main street. A building that, according to the intelligence assessment, had been unoccupied for at least 2 years. The curtain moved. Not much. A shift of maybe 2 inches. And then it was still again. It could have been a draft through a broken window frame. It wasn't a draft. She kept moving the scope. On the far side of the settlement, a section of broken glass on a warehouse door caught the light at an angle that didn't match the sun's position. A reflection that lasted less than a second and then disappeared. Someone had shifted behind that glass. Someone who didn't know that the angle they had chosen was wrong for the light conditions at 0712 in the eastern Sarin Ridge corridor. And around the base of the third abandoned truck in the eastern arc, the dirt was disturbed in a pattern that didn't match weather erosion or the random movement of debris. It matched footprints. Recent ones, from the way the edges were still sharp. Marin keyed her radio. "Rourke, this is Cole. I have movement indicators at 3 separate points inside the perimeter. Curtain shift, building 2 left. Reflection anomaly, eastern warehouse. Fresh ground disturbance around vehicle arc, eastern approach. Recommend holding position." A pause. "Cole, what's your confidence level?" Rourke's voice was controlled, but she could hear the edge in it. The edge of a man who was already inside the perimeter and didn't want to hear what she was telling him. "High," she said. "These aren't residual signs. They're current." Another pause, longer this time. In the scope, she could see Rourke raise his fist to halt the team. He was looking around the settlement, doing his own read. She watched him study the buildings, the trucks, the open ground ahead. Then his voice came back through the radio, flat and final. "I've got nothing confirmed on the ground. We keep moving. Hold your position and do not engage without a direct order." Marin lowered the radio. She understood the logic. She even understood the position he was in, years of operational experience telling him that a read from elevation and a few ambient details didn't justify stalling a time-sensitive mission. She understood all of it. What she couldn't do was unfeel the certainty sitting in her chest like a stone. She put her eye back to the scope and watched Arrow 7 move deeper into Morrowgate, and she counted the buildings on either side of them, and she thought about the water tower at the northern end with its perfect sightlines. And she did the only thing left available to her. She watched. She waited. And she quietly began calculating angles. The ambush opened at 07:31. It didn't start with a single shot. It started with everything at once. A coordinated eruption of fire from 4 rooftops, the water tower and the eastern warehouse, simultaneously. Timed with the kind of precision that confirmed immediately this was not a defensive reaction. This was a prepared position. This was exactly what Marin had told them it was. Arrow 7 scattered on instinct. Rourke's voice cut through the radio immediately, sharp and controlled, calling positions and directing movement, years of training taking over before the conscious mind had fully processed what was happening. Harris pulled left toward a collapsed wall. 2 other team members pushed toward the nearest building for cover. A soldier named Reeves took a hit to the upper arm within the first 15 seconds and went down hard against a concrete barrier, still moving but unable to use his rifle. Marin was already working the scope before Rourke finished his first transmission. From the southern ridge, her field had what she could see. 2 rooftop positions on the left side of the main street, the water tower. 3 fighters visible at ground level, 2 right side rooftops from here. I need to move to the western face. Rourke's response came between bursts of fire. Negative. Hold your position. Cover the southern pass. The southern pass is already compromised. There are 3 fighters on it. If I stay here, I can take them, but I lose coverage on the positions that are pinning your team. From the western face, I can see everything. Cole. His voice had an edge that wasn't anger exactly. It was the sound of a man trying to hold a collapsing situation together with both hands and not having enough hands. I said hold your position. The extraction route was her house, none of which she could see from where she was. She listened to the radio. She heard Harris call out that they were losing ground. She heard Rourke redirect the team toward the processing facility, not because it was a good position, but because it was the only structure with enough walls left standing to provide cover. She heard the sound of the radio cutting in and out as the signal degraded in the narrow corridor between the buildings. And then she heard the voice of the team's medic, a steady operator named Caleb Thorne, breathing in the short, controlled way that people breathe when they are trying not to make noise while doing something that requires both hands and causes pain. He was working on Reeves. From the sound of it, Reeves was conscious but not functional. Thorne's voice was calm, the way medics train themselves to be calm. But underneath the calm was the particular focus of a man who knew exactly how little time he had. Marin stared through the scope at the 2 rooftop positions she could see and the 4 she couldn't. She thought about the western face, 40 meters up, full coverage, everything visible. She thought about what Rourke had said to her the night before. I need people who execute the plan. She thought about Caleb Thorne's breathing on the radio. Then she stopped thinking and started moving. She keyed the radio one more time before she left her position.
Rourke, I'm requesting permission to reposition to the western face. I have a mapped route, 4 minutes to reach the shelf. From there I can cover all remaining threat positions.
The radio crackled, gunfire in the background. Then Rourke's voice, tighter than before.
Cole, I do not have time for this. You are on the southern ridge. Stay on the southern ridge. Do your job.
I am doing my job, she said. I'm telling you that from here I can cover 2 positions. From the western face I can cover 10. The math isn't complicated. The answer is no. A burst of fire close to his position. His voice came back harder. Harris, push left now. Cole, stop tying up the radio and hold your position. That's the last time I'm saying it. The channel went to static for a moment, then filled again with the overlapping sounds of Arrow 7 trying to hold together inside a trap that was pulling tighter with every passing minute. She heard Harris acknowledge Rourke's order. She heard another team member, Briggs, call out that the northern exit from the processing facility was covered, that there were at least 2 fighters positioned to cut off any movement toward the extraction route, even if they managed to break from the building. She heard Caleb Thorne's voice again, quieter this time, still steady, still working. Marin took her eye away from the scope and looked at the western face. She had studied that route for 2 days. She knew every step of it. The approach through the loose shale at the base, the diagonal traverse across the exposed midsection, the awkward final move around the overhang to reach the shelf. She knew the rock was cold and would be slick from the overnight temperature drop. She knew the exposed section in the middle would put her in the open for approximately 40 seconds. Visible from the settlement below, if anyone happened to be looking in the right direction at the right moment. She also knew that Arrow 7 had, at current rate, approximately 3 minutes before the fighters closed the final distance to the processing facility, and the situation moved from desperate to unrecoverable. She thought about what happened after unrecoverable. She thought about Rourke's voice when he told her she wasn't moving positions, not the words, but the certainty underneath them. The certainty of a man who had never once considered that she might be the most important person on this operation. The certainty that had been there from the first moment she walked across the Fort Ellery yard and he turned away from the window. She thought about how that certainty was going to get everyone killed. And then, with the particular clarity that comes when a decision has already been made and the mind finally stops pretending otherwise, Marin Cole accepted what she was about to do and what it would cost her. If she moved without orders and succeeded, there would be consequences. A formal review, a reprimand at minimum, possibly a reassignment. The kind of mark on a record that followed a soldier for years, regardless of the outcome it had produced. If she moved without orders and failed, it would be worse than that. If she stayed where she was, everyone died. She clipped her radio to her vest, secured her rifle across her back, and took one measured breath. Then she stepped off the southern ridge and started moving toward the base of the western face. She didn't look back. The western face was worse than she had mapped it. The overnight temperature had dropped further than the forecast predicted, and the rock was not just cold, it was sheeted in a thin layer of frost that made every surface treacherous in a way that didn't show until weight was applied to it. Marin discovered this on the 3rd step of the traverse section when her left boot found a hold that looked solid and turned out to be a frost-covered ledge with nothing behind it. She caught herself on her right hand, fingers jammed into a crack in the rock face. Rifle swinging hard on its sling and cracking against the stone with a sound that seemed impossibly loud against the background noise of the firefight below. She held still for 2 seconds, checked her grip, redistributed her weight, continued. The radio on her vest was picking up fragments of transmission, broken pieces of Rourke's voice. Harris calling positions, the occasional sharp sound of close fire. She couldn't make out full sentences. She didn't try. She needed everything she had for the rock. The exposed midsection took 43 seconds. She counted them. Every one of those seconds, she was visible from the settlement below. A figure moving across open stone, backlit by the pale morning sky. She moved as smoothly as she could, minimizing the visual signature of movement, keeping her profile flat against the face. No one in the settlement was looking at the western face. They were all focused inward on the processing facility, on the kill box they had constructed around Arrow 7. She reached the overhang. The final move was a 2-point transfer around a rock protrusion that required her to shift her weight completely onto her left foot while swinging her body around the outside edge. A move that on a climbing wall would have been a moderate technical problem. On a frost-covered rock face, above a 40-foot drop, with a rifle on her back and a radio on her vest, and 3 minutes left before her team was destroyed, it was something else entirely. She made the move. Her right boot skated on the frost at the critical moment. A quarter second of pure sliding sensation, nothing beneath her. The drop opening up below, and then the toe of her boot found a seam in the rock and held. She pressed herself against the face, heart slamming, and did not move for a full 3 seconds. The radio cut out completely. Static. Silence. For those 3 seconds, hanging on the western face, with the firefight somewhere below her and the radio dead in her ear, Marin Cole was entirely alone, in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. Then the radio crackled back. Rourke's voice, stripped down to its core, no command authority left in it, just the raw sound of a man who had run the math and didn't like the answer. Arrow 7, all units, fall back to interior position. Prepare for final defensive. I say again, prepare for final defensive. Final defensive. The language of last resort. The language that meant the options were gone, and what remained was to make the end as costly as possible for the other side. Marin pulled herself up over the lip of the shelf. She was there. 40 meters up western face, exactly where she had told Rourke she needed to be 36 hours ago. The entire settlement spread out below her, every rooftop, every doorway, every piece of cover, and every gap between structures laid out with the clarity of a tactical map rendered in 3 dimensions. She could see all 10 positions. She could see Arrow 7 compressed into the northern corner of the processing facility. 4 soldiers and 1 medic crouched behind whatever cover remained. Rourke at the edge, trying to organize a defense that had no good answers. She could see the fighters closing the distance. Methodical, confident, moving like people who had done this before and knew how it finished. She looked at her watch. 180 seconds. She got down into position, settled the rifle, and found the first target in her scope. She exhaled once, and systems her father had told her once, don't panic, they execute. She built the order in under 3 seconds. Position 1, the water tower. A fighter with a rifle braced against the railing angled down into the processing facility courtyard. Highest immediate threat to Rourke's position. First. Position 2, rooftop left side, 3rd building from the north, covering the only interior gap that Arrow 7 could use to redistribute within the facility. As long as that position was active, the team was static. Second. Positions 3 and 4, the 2 ground-level fighters moving along the eastern wall of the facility, closing on the blind corner where Caleb Thorne had Reeves pressed against the concrete. They were moving fast. They would reach that corner in under 90 seconds. 3rd and 4th taken together as fast as possible. Positions 5 through 8, the remaining rooftop placements in order of threat proximity to Rourke's last known location. Positions 9 and 10, the eastern warehouse, 2 fighters, visible through the blown-out loading door. The farthest targets, the worst angles. One of them partially a fighter dropped at 0743 and 11 seconds. The shot came from an angle no one in the settlement had accounted for, which meant the sound of it, the flat, directional crack of a rifle firing from elevation, arrived without a reference point. The fighters on the rooftops heard it and didn't immediately know what they had heard. That confusion lasted exactly as long as Marin needed it to. Position 2 was gone before the echo of the first shot finished crossing the settlement. The fighter on the 3rd rooftop had turned his head toward the water tower, a natural reaction, a human reaction. And that turn cost him the half-second that closed the window. In the processing facility, Rourke heard 2 shots from an unknown direction and pressed himself against the wall. He looked at Harris. Harris shook his head. Neither of them knew what was happening. Marin was already on positions 3 and 4. The 2 fighters moving along the eastern wall had stopped at the sound of the shots. Another human reaction. Another half-second gift. She took position 3, clean. Position 4 was moving again by the time she found him, accelerating now, adrenaline overriding the instinct to freeze. She led him by exactly the right margin and fired. 47 seconds had elapsed. In the radio, she heard Rourke's voice, different now, stripped of the command cadence, raw, and trying to understand. What is happening? Who is engaging? Harris, do you have eyes on a friendly position? No one answered him. No one had eyes on it. Position 5. Position 6. The rooftop fighters were moving now, trying to find new cover, trying to locate the source. Movement was good. Movement meant they were thinking about survival instead of the team below. Position 5 dropped while relocating. Position 6 made it to the far edge of the rooftop and stopped crouching behind a low parapet, a position that was excellent cover against fire from below and meant absolutely nothing against fire from above and to the west. 101 seconds. Positions 7 and 8 went in a span of 12 seconds. The settlement was fracturing, the remaining fighters pulling back, pulling inward, losing the coordinated pressure that had made the ambush work. Below, Marin could see Arrow 7 beginning to move. Rourke was pushing the team toward the interior of the facility, using the sudden reduction in incoming fire to redistribute. He still didn't know why the fire was reducing. He was operating on instinct and training, and both of them were good enough to take advantage of an opening even without understanding its source. 138 seconds. Position 9 was the fighter who had been covering the facility's northern exit, the one Briggs had called out on the radio, the one that had sealed the last escape route. He was still at his post, still disciplined, still doing exactly what he had been positioned to do. He was the last thing standing between Arrow 7 and a viable exit. Marin exhaled, fired, and he was gone. 152 seconds. Position 10. She found him through the blown-out loading door of the eastern warehouse, the farthest target 260 meters, partially obscured by the collapsed interior wall she had noted during her initial scan. She could see his left shoulder and the side of his head. The wind off the western face was pushing left to right at an angle that had been consistent for the last 2.5 minutes, but would not stay consistent. She had one shot. If she waited for a better window, the window might not come. If she fired on the current data and the wind shifted in the final 50 meters of flight, she would miss. And a miss at position 10 after 9 queen shots would reveal her location to every remaining fighter in the settlement. She did not wait. She made the adjustment. She found the stillness that her father had taught her, not the absence of pressure, but the acceptance of it, the way a held breath becomes something you inhabit rather than something you endure. She fired. 179 seconds. The eastern warehouse went silent. The settlement went silent, with it the sudden, absolute silence of a situation that has completely reversed itself, where the hunters have become the hunted and haven't yet processed the change. And into that silence, Marin keyed her radio with a steady hand. "Rourke, this is Cole. All 10 positions are down. Northern exit is clear. You have a window. Move now." A long pause. Then his voice came back. Quiet, unguarded, stripped of everything except the raw fact of what he was trying to understand. "Cole, where are you?" "Western face," she said. "Shelf at 40 meters. I've had eyes on the full settlement for the last 3 minutes." Another silence, longer than the first. "Copy that," he said finally. "Arrow 7, move out. Northern exit. Now." Marin kept her eye to the scope and watched the settlement until she was certain nothing was moving that shouldn't be. Then she exhaled again, all the way out, long and slow, and let the silence settle around her like the Wyoming highlands at first light, when the whole world was still, and everything was exactly as clear as it needed to be. Arrow 7 cleared Morrow Gate at 0819. The hardware was recovered from a reinforced storage room in the back of the processing facility. 3 military-grade encryption relay units still in their original casings, packed for transport. The cell's commander, a heavy-set man named Drace, who had organized the ambush with genuine tactical competence, was found in the eastern warehouse, attempting to destroy a communications laptop. Briggs and Harris took him into custody without further incident. He didn't say anything when they cuffed him. He just looked around at the settlement with the expression of a man trying to understand where the plan had stopped working. Reeves was stable. Thorne had controlled the bleeding efficiently during the firefight and had him on a stretcher by the time the extraction helicopter landed in the clearing south of the settlement at 0847. Reeves was conscious, complaining about the cold and insisting he could walk, which Thorne ignored with the patient authority of someone who had learned that soldiers are poor judges of their own structural integrity immediately after being shot. Marin came down off the western face alone. She descended the same route she had climbed. The frost had softened slightly in the morning sun, which made it easier going down, and more unpredictable in different ways, which balanced out. She took the exposed midsection carefully. She reached the base of the face and walked south through the approach corridor to the extraction point, without hurrying. Rourke was standing at the edge of the clearing when she arrived. The rest of the team was already at the helicopter. He had been watching her cross the open ground, and he had the look of a man who had been standing there for a while, working through something that didn't resolve cleanly from any angle he could find. He didn't say anything until she was close enough that he didn't need to raise his voice. "That was you," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the western face, at the shelf 40 meters up, barely visible from the clearing. "You mapped that route before we deployed," he said. "Yes." "The night of the briefing?" "Yes." He was quiet. Around them, the rotors of the helicopter were beginning to spin up. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "I did," Marin said. She didn't qualify it. It was a fact, and she treated it like one. Rourke nodded slowly. "There'll be a review," he said. "I know." They walked to the aircraft together and climbed aboard. The helicopter climbed out of the Sarin Ridge corridor and banked south, and for the first several minutes, nobody said anything. That was normal. It was always like that after a hard operation, the decompression period, where the body was still running on the chemicals of survival, and the mind was slowly, carefully beginning to catch up with what had just happened. Soldiers stared at the floor or out the windows or at nothing in particular, doing the quiet internal accounting that combat always demanded. Reeves was on the stretcher along the starboard wall, eyes open, jaw set against the pane. Thorne was beside him, one hand checking the dressing on his arm with the automatic focus of someone who would not fully stand down until his patient was in a proper medical bay. The rest of the team, Harris Briggs, 2 others, sat in various states of exhaustion, rifles between their knees, helmets off. Marin sat near the port window and watched the ridge fall away below. It was Rourke who broke the silence. He reached up and pulled his headset down around his neck, a deliberate gesture one the team noticed, signaling that what came next was not tactical communication, but something else entirely. He looked at Marin first. Then he looked around at the rest of the team, making sure he had every set of eyes before he spoke. "I want to say something before we land," he said. His voice was level, but it had the particular weight of words that had been considered carefully. What happened at Marrowgate, the way it went, in the box we ended up in, that's on me. Cole flagged the ambush set up before we deployed. She flagged it again on approach. I overrode her both times. He paused. That was the wrong call. Not because the outcome was bad, though it was nearly catastrophic, but because I let my assumptions about who she was override what she was actually telling me. That's a command failure. Mine. The helicopter held its altitude. No one spoke. She repositioned without authorization, Rourke continued. That's in the record, and it stays there. But I want every person on this team to understand what that repositioning actually was. It was the only thing that kept this operation from ending the way it should have ended, given the mistakes I made getting us into that position. He looked at Marin directly. She saw what I didn't see. She prepared for what I told her wasn't going to happen. And when the moment came, she made the right call under conditions that would have stopped most people cold. Marin held his gaze and said nothing. Across the helicopter, Caleb Thorne looked up from Reeves's dressing. He found Marin's eyes across the interior of the aircraft. A quiet, direct look, brief and without ceremony. Then he nodded once and looked back down at his work. It was enough. Marin turned back to the window. Below the Sarin Ridge corridor was already disappearing into the distance the settlement at Marrowgate, reduced to a small cluster of structures in a fold of rock, barely visible, already becoming the past. She watched it until it was gone. The formal review took 11 days. Marin sat in front of a 3-person panel at Fort Ellery and answered every question directly and without embellishment. She confirmed that she had repositioned without authorization. She confirmed that she had been given a direct order to hold her position and had chosen not to follow it. She laid out her reasoning in sequence: the satellite imagery analysis, the 2 requests to reposition that had been denied, the timeline of the firefight, the coverage gap from the southern ridge, the window available from the western face. She presented it the way she presented everything, as information, clearly organized, without asking the panel to feel any particular way about it. Rourke submitted a written statement to the panel on the second day. He wrote that the repositioning decision, while technically insubordinate, had been operationally correct. He wrote that the threat assessment Cole had provided prior to deployment had been accurate and had been dismissed without sufficient analytical basis. He wrote that the outcome of the Marrowgate operation, full objective achieved, hardware recovered, cell commander in custody, 0 fatalities, was directly attributable to actions taken by Specialist Cole from the western face position. And he wrote that the panel should weigh the formal infraction against the operational record, with the understanding that the command failure at Marrowgate had originated not with the soldier who broke ranks, but with the commander who had created the conditions that made breaking ranks the only viable option. The panel issued a formal notation in Marin's file, a reprimand for unauthorized repositioning during an active operation. It would stay in her record for 2 years before becoming eligible for review. It was the mildest possible outcome. Everyone in the room understood why. 3 weeks after Marrowgate, Rourke submitted a separate recommendation to the Fort Ellery Tactical Operations Board. He recommended the establishment of a dedicated long-range reconnaissance sniper element, a 4-person unit operating with expanded positional autonomy during high-complexity operations, with the authority to identify and move to optimal engagement positions based on real-time threat assessment rather than pre-mission assignment. He recommended Marin Cole as unit commander. The board approved the recommendation in full. Rourke told Marin himself in the same operations room where he had handed her map back to her and told her the plan wasn't changing. He didn't make a speech of it. He told her the board had approved that she would have 60 days to build her unit, and that the expanded autonomy protocols she would operate under were, in his view, something the command structure at Fort Ellery should have implemented 2 years ago. Then he said one more thing. He said that when Walsh came back off injury rotation, he was going to tell him what had happened at Marrowgate. Not as a story, as a training case. Because the failure at Marrowgate wasn't a failure of tactics or firepower or intelligence. It was a failure of listening. And that kind of failure didn't fix itself without being named directly. Marin nodded. She didn't say that she appreciated it, because appreciation wasn't quite the right word for what she felt. What she felt was closer to the quiet satisfaction of a thing finally being seen accurately. Not celebrated, not dramatized, just seen. 6 weeks later, on a cold morning that felt like every cold morning she had ever known in Wyoming, Marin Cole stood on the Fort Ellery training range in front of 7 junior soldiers who had been selected for the new reconnaissance element. They were watching her the way soldiers watch a new commander, measuring, uncertain, trying to calibrate what kind of authority she carried and how she intended to use it. She looked back at them for a moment without speaking. Then she told them to put their rifles down and pick up their range maps instead. She told them that before any of them fired a single shot in her unit, they were going to learn how to read terrain, really read it, the way it needed to be read, until the landscape told them everything they needed to know before the situation ever forced their hand. She told them that the most important shot they would ever take was the one that came from understanding what they were looking at. She told them to open their maps, and for the first time since Marin Cole had arrived at Fort Ellery, nobody in that yard looked at her with doubt in their eyes. The mountain, as her father had always said, only cared whether you had paid attention. She had, and now finally, so did everyone else. There's something worth sitting with in a story like this. The idea that real capability doesn't announce itself. It prepares, it waits, and when the moment comes, it delivers. Marin didn't need anyone to believe in her before she acted. She just needed to believe in what she had already put in the work to become. If that kind of story is what you come here for, the ones about people who were doubted, overlooked, or counted out, and what they did about it, then stick around. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. See you in the next one.